Afternoon. This is Robin Mines. Welcome. My name is Ebuka Obiuchendu. Thanks a lot for joining us on the show today. Pretty hectic couple of weeks. We've had across the country with so many issues uh, coming up and being thrown at us, and a lot of Nigerians are not particularly sure what's going on. In certain states, there seems to be a lack of presence of security operatives still at this point, and most people are still very scared of leaving their homes. We're hearing so many things about, alleged killings in Oyigbo, which is a part of Rivers State. We're not sure exactly what's happening. Hopefully, the government and security operatives can step up and, secure lives. Yeah, property is important, but lives are most important, and I hope that this can start, seeing an end. There's already a lot going on in 2020. We're still battling a very deadly pandemic, which is going through a second wave across the world, and Nigeria is hopefully going to remain open because the lockdown seems to be coming up in a lot of countries across the world now. We need some sort of semblance of sanity for people to be able to go about their businesses in a civil manner and stay safe. We're going to be starting our conversation today talking about governance and accountability in Nigeria. So much to talk about, especially a lot of issues that have come up in the recent past. And I have here with me, Well, thanks for being here today.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah, there's a lot of questions have come up. Like I said, the protests happened. NSARS is still a burning issue, even though the protest on the streets might have died down. There's still a conversation that a lot of people are still having with regards to just what's going on with this, what's next. People are saying they're still sightings of SARS operatives on the streets. We're not sure. And so I want to talk about accountability now, because 2 weeks ago on the show, I talked about, the trust deficit between government and its people. And that seems to be a constant, sort of tug of war between both parts. Why does it seem so difficult for Nigerians to be able to hold government accountable? That's what it feels like.
Well, I would say that's an interesting question, and it might be worthy to note that quite a lot of people have done extensive research on what and I think you did adduce to it by saying, I don't think it's something that can be easily exhausted in perhaps a 30-minute or a 1-hour conversation. But the fact is, it's, for me, I think it fundamentally has to do with the structure of governance and the realities of how we have decided to govern ourselves. A case in point might just be for us to refer to, what do we call the present system of government in which we run? Quote unquote, this is supposed to be a federalist state, right? But we are not practicing what federalism is, model, like the Americans would have it. We don't have that independence of states and issues, and that even now cascades even down to police states, how we have, devolution of powers and having state police and issues around that. So all of these things goes back fundamentally to how Nigerians, or we as a people, have decided to govern ourselves. And the fact remains that the people did not decide to have this system as we have it. This was a military system that was inherited, and the democracies that have come after it right now have decided to retain it as it is.
So it's basically like a hangover of sort of the military mentality where things were done a certain way and the citizens are used to responding a certain way.
Absolutely. The president himself even adduced to it. The statement he was credited to saying, I did hear him say, oh yeah, he listened, or he accepted a few of the demands at the initial stage, and it seems as if it is being interpreted as, as weakness. That already shows a very flawed understanding of his responsibility as the servant-in-chief of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. That's already a flawed understanding, and to think that the entire presidency approved that statement, or that's like the product of all of the people and their understanding of what democracy is, allow the president and he himself, vetted and okayed that statement for him to say to the Nigerian people. That shows how deep-rooted and flawed our system, our understanding of what democracy ideally should work. Yeah. So it goes back to the basic, really. It's important for us to really go back to the basics. Accountability is literally not possible. We cannot hold our leaders accountable. It's a system problem. Once the system is wrong, I always say that no matter who you throw, think of the greatest leaders you can imagine over time. Throw them into the Nigerian system. The chances that they'll be demystified is so high. We have a system problem. We also have a capacity problem. We can get to that, but the system is fundamentally flawed. If you don't, okay, now look at the solution he has decided to the line. They go to the approach of saying state governments should now, open panels of inquiry to do all that. So it's convenient now. It's convenient now to devolve powers because the blame is shifted from the federal government. But when it's time right now to give the others, we know where the others actually come from. So it goes back to the fundamentals. So why are they beating around the bush? Why are they dancing? This government came into power And part of the cardinal things they promised was true federalism, was restructuring. Those were the cardinal principles that the All Progressive Party decided to say, okay, this is what they promised Nigerians. But it's about over 5 years into the administration right now. Little or no mention of it. Now, there's been some work done by a committee headed by, I think, Malam El Rufai at the time, going into the next, this last 2019 elections about restructuring and things like that. The president later came out after the election to say it was the party who promised that he did not promise that, separating his own mandate from that of the party. So you can, even if at that level, at that very high level, there's still discrepancies as regards the integration between what the party manifesto is and what the president's plan is.
Let me go to Mutiata Oladejo, who's joining us from Ibadan, to get her contributions to this conversation. Thanks for joining us, Mutiata. I want to talk about, he mentioned restructuring there, if you can hear me. And it's a conversation or a word that's thrown around a lot lately. Is that a realistic goal, looking at the way Nigeria is set up right now? We have a lot of politicians who are not very excited about that word. Most people say, what does restructuring even mean? Especially with regards to accountability, holding government accountable. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, when we talk about restructuring in Nigeria, Nigeria already has a structure. And restructuring depends on the way you see Nigeria as a citizen. We have the federal, state, and local governments, and going by the 1954 federal constitution, we already have a structure. However, governance since then has not been going by the structures and implementing the policies as contained in the constitution. Now, when we want to match that with accountability, our problem in Nigeria really is the fact that our local government system is not working efficiently. And since the local government is not working, that's a big challenge in the sense that, for instance, in Nigeria, we have 774 local governments. A number of people don't even understand the role of the local government chairman and what structures are there in the local government. For example, when it's time for election, we only see these politicians, and then there's something we call campaign finance tracking. We realize that a number of them actually have support groups, and they have excellent management and leadership styles by which they mobilize to win elections. Then if that is the case, why can't we bring this idea into accountability and governing of the state at the local government level? Now, there is a challenge in Nigeria presently because we have rural-urban transformation in most societies. Places where we regard as villages in the past are now suburban areas or even cities. And so the problem is that does the local government system in Nigeria understand the dynamics of managing these emerging African societies? So it is until some people who are interested in being in Nigerian government, if they understand what it takes to be in government, there and then we begin to say that we can begin to talk about how to rally around, mobilize, and talk about accountability. Because for me, presently, government is not more about tea party. We need a change, we need transformation. But the kind of transformation we actually need depends on the citizen. How does the citizen value the society? What does the citizen themselves understand about the kind of development they want for the society? Because these are the fundamental things by which, when the citizens understand this, we call it a kind of value orientation. If you know what you value about.
Yes, sorry to cut you in there, because there are two things you've mentioned that I want to sort of touch on. I mean, you've talked about, how, we should hold sort of the lower governments or levels of governments accountable, because, I mean, it looks like everybody seems to keep pointing at the center for everything. And you've talked about the citizens now. A lot of people will argue that the way our constitution is set up, roles are pretty clear on who should do what, right? We have the local governments, we have the state governments, and then we'll have the federal government, and it's clearly stated in the constitution what everybody's role is. Is it then on the citizens to hold these governments to account on those things that they should be doing? Because, I mean, yes, we might need restructuring, but the constitution is clear on what everybody's role should be. So is it the citizens that should be doing more of the holding accountable as against blaming government all the time?
Yes, the federal system in Nigeria has something we call a kind of concurrent list, and I think the residual list to the local government system. So between the federal and the state government and even the local government, they have powers they share. The thing is, what we need to understand at this level, given the kind of population we have in Nigeria, is that what I can term as development in my own neighborhood may not be what another person needs in his own neighborhood. So the government needs to map out what is the need, what are the needs of the citizens. Then the citizens themselves, at the local government level I'm talking about, because if we can't continue to focus on the federal level too much at this point in Nigerian society, because the federal level is responsible for some things I call a kind of bogus responsibility, which is probably defense and some other things. But when it comes to issues of education and health, these ones are the fundamental things we have to ask our government, people in government about. They need to be accountable. They need to be transparent. We have to see them in action. And seeing them in action means that they too need to understand the kind of society they are governing, while the citizens themselves need to understand what are the roles of the local government. For example, let me be a bit practical here. We have several secondary schools and primary schools that the local governments are responsible for. Do they still organize oratory contests for students? Do they organize competitions that can actually make small families within the neighborhood feel the impact of government? When they organize these kinds of competitions, for example, they will be able to see young talents, kids that have the talent to become part of the society and contribute to the development of Nigeria in future. All these things, much as they are minute and fundamental, do we have structures at the local government level that tend to work on these things? It will be a shame when you go to local governments and even ask the officials there about some of the things they ought to be doing, and you see this kind of nonchalant attitude, and even some of them don't even have an idea of how some of these things should be. And so these are the kind of challenges we have. So when we talk about local government and accountability, we should begin to beat it down. What are the things that we expect to see from our local government level? It is when we begin to see our society from that perspective, then it's not as if there won't be a way of engaging the federal level. I know there are several civil society organizations that actually have a way of making the federal government see how they are performing, understand their performance levels and all that.
All right, I'm going to come back to you, Michelle. Let me come with you now, Ope. Sort of going on from what she's talked about there is something that a lot of people have always wondered: how do we start, to look more inwards, as against looking up there in Abuja all the time for answers? And something that happened interestingly this week, there was videos of members of the State House of Assembly here in Lagos trying to deliberate on a certain issue. And there was an uproar, basically, and people called out, House of Assembly members. There were even talks about recalling some of them at some point. But Lagos is one state, and there's the constant conversation of, Lagos's voice is amplified because it has a very sort of dynamic population. The middle class is pretty strong here, as against other states where you might not have that sort of an eclectic mix of people who are able to, be a force. So how do we sort of make this more normal across board without, is it a government issue or is it the citizens sort of going off from what she said?
Absolutely. I think there's an awakening required. And I think that awakening has started with the NSAS. That was like the trigger that has, ignited. Now, all of these issues that happen as far as Lagos State is concerned, these are things that have been happening over time. There's just a little focus now on that aspect of things. And I think that is quite encouraging. We need to start seeing more of that. It is only through that medium of accountability that we're able to call them to question, to even see where the mistakes are, put them on their toes. That's definitely necessary. But I still think it's important right now that we go back to there's a structure. The structure is fundamentally flawed. Now, the federal government cannot take 60% or almost 70% of the cake and expect for us to not to put as much eyes on you. If you're going to take a huge share of the pie, we have to put commensurate attention on you if you're going to be managing that kind of resources. Speaking of local government, local government autonomy is part of the major issues that is very, integral part of restructuring, which is all part of the conversation which we're supposed to be having. How many local government chairmen? Most of them are just earning salaries. As far as I'm concerned, if we go across the country, they're all just political appointees. Elections are not even being conducted at that level. They are all just serving at the mercy of the executive governor, who just uses it right now to tidy up his loyalists and things around that. So there is really not government being driven, accountable to the very people at the local level. So there is a need right now to first create a structure that enables people to function. That's why I believe that no matter how well equipped you are, no matter how good you are, if you have a systems problem, it's difficult. And even if, let's even just imagine that you're the most altruistic person who is able to perform beyond reasonable doubt. What happens? At the very most, you serve 8 terms and you go. But if the system is not in place, so we continue this journey of maybe 8 steps forward, and we take another 20 steps backward.
Yeah.
But if you have a system in place, the system guarantees, even when a bad person comes, the system checks him or her, So it is important. So that's why my own emphasis is more of, let's get the systems right. Now, there's a lot of advocacy around young people going to office. Like she mentioned, let's start asking questions. Let's start asking questions of our leaders from local government to the federal level. Before we even begin to push these young people forward, let us be clear about what the problem is and what are the immediate things we want to address. Because I believe if we change the flock and replace it, it's just going to maintain the same old status quo.
Something that a lot of people have said, we seem to want to have a quick fix to a lot of these things. We've had constitutional conferences endlessly since Nigeria has started. We've had so many of these panels and things. And there's also the conversation about it being the legality of it. If you start a constitutional conference, what then is the job of the National Assembly, in all of this? And how do we make that sort of body legal? But just to play devil's advocate here again, there's a whole law that allows Nigerian citizens to approach government and demand to see certain things. Documents, open your files, open your books. The Freedom of Information Bill, yes. No sort of reform is easy. And there's a conversation about we want it to happen, everything to happen immediately. Are we able to stay the course? Because do you find that a lot of Nigerians know about the FOI, know that they can demand for these things and actually get answers?
Without a doubt, I think there is a huge disparity between Nigerians who are, there's despair in the land. That is given. People are hopeless, people are hungry, and all that is what we've seen played out, with the NSAS protest and all of the lootings that took place. It further revealed the disparities and deprivation, even amongst protesters, amongst people, how deprived people are, and it goes into how distrust, how, the level of hunger in the land, that's evident. However, I think it still comes back to how do we want to take this forward? And is there political will? To answer your question, what do we have the required political will? I mean, it's not rocket science. What were we demanding for as far as NSAS was concerned? We wanted, the president or the government could have just shown good faith by issuing a statement saying all the protesters who have been arrested across the country, the police should immediately release them by just dissolving Abacha style. The president has that mandate. He has the authority to do that. The Inspector General of Police has that mandate to do that. That even shows for the very first time that you are responsive. But they are interpreting it as a way of, the people are pulling your strings. It means that you're losing your power. As an emperor that you are, you shouldn't be, it's like a benevolence. You do it as a token.
Yeah. Let me just get a final word now from you, Mutiat, as quickly as you can. And still on the issue of trust. How do we start to close that gap, the trust deficit between Nigerians and the government? Very quickly.
Yeah, trust. Yeah, it's something that is very important, but it's unfortunate that right from the moment Nigeria was created, there is mutual distrust and suspicion. But notwithstanding, I think it is the obligation of the citizens to begin to look inwards into what the government is doing. Be interested in looking at, forget about your bias. I think another problem we have in Nigerian society is bias. You have probably ethnic-based bias or religious-based bias. If you can remove these two and begin to look at the government critically, try and understand what the government is doing, it is from there that you have a mindset to actually know the kind of questions to ask and how beneficial is what the government is doing to society. Then you begin to criticize wisely. Because the unfortunate thing in Nigerian society presently now is that a number of youths don't understand how to really criticize what they can find in their society. And if that alone is a problem, because if you don't understand what you are criticizing, then you won't even have a way how to find a solution to the problem in society. Because as a historian, I realized that there are if you look at Nigerian societies in the colonial era, you realize that some of these things we are talking about had been existing since then. So if that
thank you
problem
very
had
much.
been since then in contemporary times, how do we talk about it? That means we need to trust ourselves. We need to move beyond ethnic and religious bias and understand how our government is engaging us. Then we engage the government. Either way. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mitia. Thank you very much, Okpe. Like we say in Nigeria, problem not the finish. So we can only keep talking about these things, and please come back when we call you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.